Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. This is Chris Heuer from CXD Now, because the time for customer experience design is now. I don't know that I'll ever get tired of that. Actually, I'm already tired of it. But hey, it's a thing. It's a zeitgeist moment. I really believe that. Everywhere I go, I'm seeing a rise in empathy, a rise in a better understanding that we're in it together. And as a result of that, marketing is becoming market engagement. And we're looking at the idea of how do we actually better serve the market and our customers. And that's why I'm excited about being able to do this show, thanks to the support of IBM Commerce and the IBM Journey Designer product. We're here today with Tobias Rose and also with Sarah. And oh, it's gone already. Sarah, your last name again, please, so I do it right.
Grzybowski.
Grzybowski. Thank you so very much. It came back as soon as I forgot it. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us, and thank you, Tobias. I think it's a really important thing to get people's names right. Mine gets butchered all the time, and I tend not to care, but I try to do my best to pay respect to others through that way. I think it's an important gesture and to attempt to get right. So thank you, Sarah Grzybowski, for getting that out to me. So we're here today to talk about the future of customer experience design, what is needed, what's next. And actually, I wanted to start first with just a little background on Tobias and Sarah. So Tobias, if we could, just what is it that you're doing now where you're applying CX and design principles?
Sure. Yeah. So my experience in around this big philanthropic endeavor, it really felt like a very small component of a much larger system that was at play. You know, that there was this kind of economic injustices that were out there, but that there was much greater opportunity to do things. And I'm a systems thinker, and I've always thought in terms of systems. And so I got very, very interested in business, primarily as a vehicle for changing the world and making the world a better place. And specifically, the way that businesses are designed and the way that businesses think about their consumers and their stakeholders is a much, much larger piece of the puzzle than just the philanthropic endeavors of the world. So, I moved back from Asia after this project was completed, and moved to San Francisco and started doing this really intensive work with different companies around designing products and the core businesses to help them make sure that they were doing good things in the world through their products. And that is, that's kind of a broad statement. Everyone uses that as a little bit of a trope, but I think if you are a business, if you have the best interests of your consumers in mind, and that involves a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding, then you are going to design a product that actually makes the world a better place. So
yep.
I really got to.
Well, that's why I use this phrase, serve the market, right? And I only call it market instead of community because it's a business term. Otherwise, it would be talking about serving the community and serving the people. But by using the term market, I'm giving a hat tip to the language of the culture that I'm trying to help shape a little bit.
I agree. Yep.
And actually, what I find is, following up on that point, that if you do that, the cost of sales, the cost of labor, everything ends up going down as a result of that. And the path to greatest profitability is through greater empathy for your customers and for being of service to the broader community in the world at large. So we just need more evidence and research to support that. So that's part of what I'm hoping that we're going to get from IBM as what they're doing with Journey Designer next. So Sarah, can you tell me a little bit about your role in the Journey Designer team and your experience around CX and what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So I'm the marketing manager for Journey Designer. So my role is actually to design the journeys for people who might be users and consumers of Journey Designers. So for the customer experience designers and the marketers, which has been really interesting because I got to use it before it came out in the market at all. So being able to take, that step back, use it, give input, as well as work really closely with our product team and our sponsor users, which are groups of customers that we have who are really talking about how they want to infuse the customer and that empathy for the customer, as you guys have been saying, into everything that they're doing, from marketing to customer service to sales throughout the entire organization. So.
Excellent. And through that, the one thing that I really love about this is I used to think about this when we were building these early websites back in 94 and 95, more in 95, because that's when it really started, picking up. That because we were able to see the code through view source, we were actually like using the thing to grow the thing, if you will. I don't know that I'm explaining that properly, but sort of sort of organic thing in a recursive sort of way, right? And so that's kind of the experience you had. And in fact, I just want you to share the one story as you started working with some of these example customers, if you could share a little bit about Anne more specifically, so we can actually have an empathy map for who a customer experience designer is, or who the people are that might make up somebody filling that role.
Yeah, absolutely. And Anne is obviously not a real person. She's our persona that really represents the individual who's going to be focused on customer experience, whether it's for a product, a segment, a line of products, anything that your organization may be doing. But Anne is really, really an emerging role, and we're starting to see that in a couple of our customers. And everything she does focuses around the customer, and she's responsible for bringing together the experience across everything, all the channels to get to the goal of that experience, whether it be, inviting someone to a webinar or coming to something like our event today, or much bigger pieces too, which could be the launch of a new product line or a holiday experience that you want your customers to have. So she's really an emerging role, and she is highly focused on making sure that that customer segment she works with and the segment she works with are having a consistent, relevant experience with all of that right content and offers and personal touch. I'd almost say that she's responsible for engineering like those wow moments.
Yeah, and more than that, actually being the customer advocate too inside
Yes.
the organization, which I think is really important. But actually, as it is, and this is one of the reasons why I was excited about being able to do this show, is that I think that we're at this zeitgeist moment, but there needs to be a halcyon call for radical customer centricity, because we've only been paying lip service to it broadly. And the challenge is that we've seen, and as I've talked to more companies, there are very few companies with Anne inside of it, Instead, it's this coalition of the willing sort of problem, right? So Tobias, when you're working with the client, have you ever had a situation where you've had kind of a chief experience officer or chief customer officer that you've worked with, or has it been with, various marketing departments?
So usually it's with smaller companies. I usually work with the executive team. I think that it's important to have buy-in from an executive team in order to make this stuff really go correctly. So the average number or size of the companies that I work with is 50 to 100 people. So it's not it's early to growth stage startups. And yeah, so it involves working usually with their CEO and their product team pretty closely on making sure that they have they're empowered to make the right decisions within the product that aren't going to short the customer, that are actually going to, provide net long-term value to the customer. And I think that if you carry that in mind, outside of this, just this kind of sense of, bringing back to the app or bringing back to there's this tremendous drive within startups specifically these days to get people in front of your application as much as possible, right? As quickly as possible, as often as possible. And that doesn't necessarily improve their overall experience, right? If for instance, Facebook right now, I think is going through a little bit of a struggle because they have built these algorithms so well that people are actually deleting it from their phone because it's too addictive. It's actually become this thing in which people are just too, it's too much, right? So
compelling, yeah.
It's not actually improving their lives as much as it could because people are spending more time than they should on it. So that's kind of an example of the kind of thinking that you need to employ. It's like, what is the best time, as my friend Tristan Harris says, what's the time well spent that you're providing to your users, as opposed to this more broad, just getting them back and just selling them another thing. which I think is very, very important.
Yeah, this is really, I think, the challenge as we go ahead between old world thinking and new world, which is that, the old world thinking is how do I increase page views, how do I increase ad serving, how do I do all this other stuff, and without concern necessarily for the long-term implications. Whereas there's much more of a, market-focused empathy where you realize there's a point at which it's become detrimental. Not only that, but you're also driving away you're driving away loyal customers or loyal relationships and making them X's. So that's even another problem in itself. So how do you actually stem that tide and look at a long-term harmonic balance of the overall ecosystem so that we can maintain it and keep values in it? That's actually why I wrote the article for TED at IBM that guiding principles are the first necessity. Now, we can't debate the filter bubble much more because that would take the whole rest of the afternoon. But, Sarah, when you're talking to clients and some of the users and archetypical personas that you've been, who are the real life Annas or the people, or Anns, excuse me, or the people who make them up, what sorts of challenges are they facing that they're trying to overcome? I mean, have they had discussions like that around that business issue? Or is it still going back to the simple, how do I get everyone to agree on, what the persona looks like?
I think you have all areas of the spectrum on that side, because we have customers that we've talked to who, they have still, people who are responsible for their channels and for different parts of the organization. They're not looking at that whole experience for the customer, and they're really struggling with that communication and that ability to get everyone on the same page and organize around who their customers are. But on the other end of the spectrum, and we have one customer who has really rallied, and not everyone can do this because they physically rallied around their personas and the people that they're building everything for, from their products to their content to everything. And they actually have rooms you can go into to get into the mind of that customer. And they have, someone who is responsible for that segment and for that customer that they're targeting, who's helping all the people who are working on the channels and the content to bring it together. So every bit of that kind of spectrum has been covered with our different users, if that makes sense. And, we have that same spectrum within IBM itself too, and trying to be able to bring together all of our groups as a larger organization to be able to rally everyone around that. Here is, we're building this for Anne, and we're sending, we're trying to get Anne the right experience, not just when she buys something, and buys the journey designer or whatnot, or comes in to do the trial, but to help her actually use it and get value out of it. And how do we do that and bring it beyond kind of that traditional endpoint of the sale to bring that experience so that she's able to be more successful. So,
and that's why I'm glad you guys were able to, help us and support me doing this show, because getting these stories out in front of people to let them know they're not alone in fighting for this greater purpose is, I think, really important, as is some of the stories of success. Because, when we were talking with Resto Ladasmaki from Idean a couple of weeks ago and talking about the value, very much a lot of it for the people he's dealing with is that they just realize they have to. There's this understanding that the competitive nature of the markets they're in requires it. But there still are monopoly-based or close to monopoly-based companies in certain markets who have no desire or no need to move to this sort of thinking. Some of them are forward-thinking and are doing it, but many aren't. So we really have to keep collecting stories of what is the value of it in order to be able to convince the CFO and other people that it's a worthwhile investment of time and effort, which is where I hope some of this research comes forward. So as we look at this ideal world where every company might have a chief experience architect, as Brian Solis talks about in his book, The Experience When Business Meets Design, what is it going to take to get from here to there where that's just a normal thing? Tobias, do you have any thoughts on maybe what we're missing today or what's needed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a sense of, this is such a huge word and it's used all the time, but I think that a real abiding sense of empathy in business is necessary in order to actually create this kind of future that we need for our companies and our businesses. you can't just be focused on the short term. You need to be thinking about what the long-term goal is, and the long-term benefit is you're providing your customers. And that only comes from, I think, like real concrete and understood sense of empathy and connection to your customers and what is best for them. And not just that, honestly, I think ultimately allowing for businesses to have a sense of the well-being and empathy of their stakeholders as well, not just their shareholders, but their stakeholders as well. I know that's spoken about in the impact investing world a lot, but I think that if people really understand their impact in the world and can draw those lines outside of just this tight little circle, which involves yourself and your family, and increases it to include more components of the human race, then I think that we make ultimately better products, and ultimately more money for the world in general, and more impact on the world in general.
Let me do another synthesis of that again, because again, I think your story, your approach hit on some really important, salient things that I really want to drive home. That's what I'm doing over on the side. I'm writing some notes down. Number one, it's this idea of togetherness, that we're in it together and in our common humanity, which is something that we're working on broadly. But I think importantly, the definition or the difference between stakeholders and shareholders. Everyone is a stakeholder in a given organization, in a given community, whether that's an NGO, a government body, or a large profit, or a small business, or an independent contractor. We all have a stake in the success of those businesses. And I think we still have a, sort of a, what's that stupid phrase that Tara used to talk about all the time? Oh, there we go. It's not a zero-sum game anymore. It's that there is this period of abundance in front of us. It's being enabled by technology. That's really important to that stuff. And I can't read the other words that I wrote. So I'm going to leave that alone for now, and we'll come back to it a little bit more. I'm going to ask more specifically, Sarah, for you, relative to as you're looking at, serving this market of customer experience designers, as you are discussing the market and the market development, your plans to, enrich and grow the market and reach people, what is the one thing that, you think is still missing that needs to be out there in the general awareness?
See, that's a good question. The one thing.
Well, it can be many.
It could be many. So as we're trying to really talk about this and grow the awareness, I think everybody at this point knows that we want to have empathy with our customers and really think about what's right for them, because that's going to help us. And that's also supported by the fact that, customer experience is like, I think Gartner recently said like 89% of CMOs want to differentiate by next year on customer experience. But the one thing I don't think has really been out there is, we talk about the empathy, we talk about the experience, but, how are we going to make sure that we're delivering that? And how are we really going to measure that? How are we going to find out, other than like net promoter scores or something like that? Are we meeting our customers' needs? And we've got to really start thinking about how do we bring that information back into that holistic experience and that data back in a meaningful way. And that's where I see really the next steps in this coming, not just making it easier for the experienced designers to design it in a visual way, but also to be able to really, continually get that understanding of the customer, I think would be like the one thing that I think we can work on as well, because you've always got to refine that empathy and that profile and making sure that you're really understanding what they want, what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that to bear. That's a really important point. And I also wrote an article that still gets talked about and shared a bit around new mindsets, methods, and measures. And it's funny, every time I'm looking at anything, whether it was social business or now CX or even this idea of social enterprise that I've been working on with We Are the Solution for the last several months, it's the same kind of framework. We've got a new mindset towards empathy. We've got a new method in terms of journey mapping. And without that new measure as the kind of, trifecta there, it makes it really hard. And what I'm seeing right now from many of the CX designers that I've interviewed and many of the people I've been trying to get on the show who just weren't able to make the timing or whatever, is a similar sort of thing. When I ask them this value question, they're like, well, they need to do it because. And I'm like, well, that's not an answer. You're not going to convince the CEO of a Fortune 500 to invest $100 million in redesigning all their processes around customer experience and empathy because it makes people feel better. It's just not going to happen. It's not practical. And this was the biggest mistake that we saw in expanding social media broadly around the world, is that the early days people said, oh, we don't need to measure anything. We just do it because we have to, and we know we have to. And that might have worked for like the early websites moving away from faxes to an online digital sort of presence. And it didn't really necessarily work until people saw money, quite honestly. But for many people it did. They want to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. But I think we're going to have a bigger problem here. Have you had any kind of success in identifying a given metric yet? Or is it still kind of in the air relative to people looking to measure different things based on their specific
I think
strategies?
right now this is completely emerging. So we don't have one single success metric. It's, I think, very much individual to in some ways each experience. And it's not just the metrics of customer satisfaction and how the customers are working with it, but is it actually also meeting your goals as a business? Because by providing that, we still have to meet our goals and make our ROI and things like that. But we've seen it's still a lot at this point of trying to pull in clicks and things like that. But the next thing that we're seeing is bringing in truly like that sentiment and really understanding what paths customers are taking, looking at across like all of this data that's available on social and throughout your system, being able to try to figure out really like what is the sentiment your customer has in this segment? How are they really feeling about you? And that's something I think that is still really hard to get to. We talk about social sentiment and analysis, but it's not an easy thing to solve.
Well, then you have to actually ultimately map it across all the different journeys that people have and identify the different paths that people take across the different touch points. And there's a whole bunch of different data. But as I'm looking at it, one of the things that I understand that, I also had a problem with in the early interactive strategy days and social media days as well, was that we would deliver the initial strategy and project, and then they had no more money to refine it. And what we know with journey mapping is that it's a constant iterative process, and we hit a new hill, or we find another point of friction, and we need to redesign around that and constantly iterate. So I want to go to you, Tobias, and some of the projects you've done with some of your clients, how often have you been able to go back and kind of, dive into examining and optimizing those flows and understanding sentiment and friction and the various hills that people have to climb to help them solve for it to continuously improve? Because I think that would be like an ideal metric, right? How many of those could we kill, and what is the net value we get from actually solving those problems?
That's great. It's a great question there. The question the issue that you were talking about before in terms of budget is always an interesting one, because when you're time boxing outside of a traditional, immediate ROI for one of these projects, right? Usually it's actually a much larger time frame that you're working in. So when people are used to seeing immediate results, usually it's just not, this doesn't happen that way, right? You need to have more, you need to have basically just a more of a time frame to show people that this long-term best interest in the customer's well-being is what will create the best outcomes for it, right? So because you can always kind of short a customer and get some immediate kind of, you can get a hit back if you force them to do something, right? Yeah. Like if they, like these new budget airlines, for instance, if they force you to buy your carry-on baggage at the gate for $60, like you can guarantee most people are going to do that once because they have to get on their flight, but they're not going to come back after the fact, right? So from a traditional kind of MBA sense, you need to be able to talk them through this longer term vision of building brand connection and brand awareness that isn't just about this immediate hit. And it's this longer term connection that you're actually building around things. And so, yeah, I've definitely felt that there's a natural friction there because people are looking for, especially in smaller companies, people are looking for, immediate usage bumps. They're looking for immediate, increase in profits. And you need to be able to talk to them about the slow burn, basically. And that is hard, but I think it's something that needs to be talked about, and it's something that's worthwhile pursuing.
Excellent, thank you. And we're just going to move to the last question and move to wrap up here because we're coming to the top of the hour. But I'm going to actually set you up a little bit, Sarah, because I want to express kind of like how I first saw a journey designer and what have you. And it was at an event in San Diego where they actually showed the long-term vision for a journey designer, which was actually about being able to not only map the journey, but ultimately have that map become a dashboard that was alive with data and real-time feedback loops, and being able to understand the, to see friction points in real time, to see opportunities in real time, and ultimately be more of a conductor, a maestro, if you will, of being able to design these experiences on the fly, optimize, remove friction, and what have you. And I think it's a really compelling future, so compelling, in fact, that Olivia Blanchard gushed about it in a very long blog post talking about it. What sort of realistic sort of timelines do we have before we're going to get to something like that? Is that 5 years out? Is that 10 years out? I mean,
it's closer than that. It's much closer than 5 or 10 years out. It's going to always, obviously, for everybody in all organizations, it's going to be a journey, just to use that term again. But to be able to actually have solutions out there that can do that for you, if you have the data or help you collect the data, we're not looking at more than a year, probably to a year and a half tops.
Oh, wow.
There's work being done right now. And this isn't a secret. We put this out and announced at Amplify too, around being able to actually track what your customer is doing. What are the actual journeys they're taking, and what are the results of those journeys from a key metric standpoint. And that's something that's on the near horizon as well. So there's this whole idea, and it's going to come down to how can we get that data we need and have it being, have it coming in constantly, get away from like those overnight batches and really get to that like low level transactional portion of it to be able to bring it up to that level so quickly. And it's out there, and it's not 10 years away. It's coming quick, and it's coming soon.
That's awesome. So that's awesome. So let me recap here as we have to move to close, because the new mindsets we're talking about is about empathy, long-term thinking, quality, and a focus on experience as a key component of value. The methods we have for that is empathy mapping, journey design, actually then beyond that, optimizing that journey, creating real-time feedback loops through data integration, and ultimately the metrics, while still be determined, are still about the amount of money we have to invest versus the returns we see. And perhaps we'll be able to develop some new metrics as we move along, building on top of sentiment and some other sorts of factors that have come up in our recent conversational intelligence boom that's come from social media. So it is an exciting future ahead of us. And what it takes is actually a willingness to co-create. And that's what I agreed to do when I started working with IBM on this project, to help co-create this future, because I believe if we're able to have these tools, and if we're able to have more people who understand how to make proper and ethical use of these tools, that there can be nothing else but a better future for us all. So this is Chris Heuer, and I've been joined by Tobias and Sarah today, and we've been sponsored by IBM Commerce and IBM Journey Designer for this entire series. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk about customer experience design after working on it for so long. And I thank you all so very much for joining us and on this journey. A quick announcement, I'm working on some elements to actually do an ongoing show starting in early 2016. We'll talk more about that in the coming blog posts over the next several weeks. Thank you in the meantime for joining us in this first series.